In this lesson, I will dive into absolute cell references. I have already mentioned that the way I write a cell as I have done it so far, it's called a relative reference. I will double click on cell B15 and notice that in the function cell B1 is simply written with the column and the row side by side. Similarly, cell B14 is written in the same way. When I write a cell by just putting the column and the row, as it is here, it is called a relative cell reference. I will show you soon that you can write a cell differently, and that's why I emphasize on this. Remember that when in a formula or a function you write a cell with a relative reference, the fill handle is allowed to change the column or the row depending on the direction you drag the fill handle. I will use the fill handle for cell B15 and drag it to the right up to cell F15. I will double click now on cell C15 and as expected cells B1 and B14 became C1 and C14 while similarly the column changed in the other cells because I dragged the fill handle horizontally. The fill handle had the right to change the column because the cells were written with a relative reference. I will now go to cell H2, which contains the sum of cells B2 to G2. I will also use the fill handle here and drag it down to cell H13. I will click on cell H3 and as expected cells B2 and G2 became B3 and G3 while similarly the row changed in the other cells because I dragged the fill handle vertically. The fill handle was allowed to change the row because the cells were written with a relative reference. Okay, up to this point I haven't showed you anything new. There are some cases though in which relative cell references don't work correctly and then you need absolute references. I will click to select the cell I2 and I will double click to open it. Here I multiply the sum of the month in H2 by the profit percentage in cell J2 to get the profit for that specific month. Alright, no problem here. I will press enter, select I2 again, and with its fill handle I will drag to I13. Well, it's clear that something went wrong here. I will double click on cell I3 and see what happened here. As expected, cells H2 and J2 became H3 and J3. But in this case, I don't want J2 to change. I want it to always remain as J2. The fill handle detected relative cell references and made the changes. So how do I tell the fill handle not to alter cell J2? This is where I need to use absolute cell references. I will press escape here to close the cell and with a double click I will open cell I2. I will delete cell J2 here and in its place I will type $J $2. Now I have written cell J2 with an absolute cell reference. So when I write a cell not by just typing the column and the row, but also by putting the $sign before the row, the column and before the row, then I have an absolute cell reference to that cell. When I write only the column and the row without dollars, like H2 here, then I have a relative cell reference. In the formula itself or the function, this makes no difference. That is, cell J2 was multiplied before and cell J2 will be multiplied now. The whole difference is how the fill handle will behave with this cell. So the difference between an absolute cell reference and a relative cell reference is the way they are treated by the fill handle. I will press enter here and select I2 again. With the fill handle I will drag to cell I13. And now things went as I wanted. I will click on cell I3 and see in the formula bar that while H2 became H3, J2 remained J2. The fill handle kept the cell written with an absolute reference as a constant, but at the same time it modified the one that was written with a relative reference. Using the same logic, I can work in cell B16 as well. I will double click to open it and see that cell B15 is multiplied by cell B17. When I drag the fill handle to the right, I want cell B15 to change and become C15, D15 and so on, so that it multiplies the sum of its different year. but I don't want cell B17 to change and become C17, D17 because I don't have data there. I want cell B17 to remain constant, so I need to write B17 with an absolute cell reference by putting a $sign in front of the column and a $sign in front of the row. When the cell is already written like B17 here, I can convert the reference to absolute with an easier way. I first need the cursor to be somewhere in B17, somewhere in the cell that I want, and I can press now F4 on the keyboard. F4 converts the cell reference of the cell where the cursor is to absolute. I will press enter now, and I will select cell B16 and drag the fill handle to the right up to cell F16. I will click on cell C16 and see that cell B17 remained constant, which is why the results here are correct. So when you want to lock a cell so it doesn't change when you use the fill handle, you should write it in this form by placing dollars before the column and before the row. Otherwise, you write it in this way, which is called a relative cell reference, allowing the fill handle to modify it. I will open a presentation I have prepared to see this a bit more in detail. The relative reference for cell A10 is the one in the left column, while the absolute reference is in the right column. Similarly, for cell C4, the relative reference is this, and the absolute reference is this. Even for a range of cells, I can write it with absolute or relative reference. The relative reference for the range A4 to D15 is this one, and the absolute reference is this one. So I can have an entire range in absolute reference by placing $signs before the rows and the columns of the cells. What I want you to remember from this lesson is that apart from the relative reference of a cell, there is also the absolute reference of a cell. The difference when I write a cell with an absolute reference is that the fill handle, if I use it, it will not change it. The cell written with an absolute reference does not allow the fill handle to modify it, but it will remain constant. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching.